Good evening, everyone. This is Nimish Gopal joining along with Richa Mehta. First of all, thanks for taking your time out and learning about how to find a dream job and also prepare for your interview as well as resume. In this series, today is our second topic of how to crack your dream job interview, and we are glad to see that we have gotten a good response with registrations and excited to learn from our experts. So first of all, we would like to thank Center of Career Counseling, Training and Placements, Office of Career Advancement for Students, Maharaja Sayajirao University, Baroda, Gujarat. This webinar is being held under their aegis and their entire support. So, as I said, today's topic is how to crack your dream job interview. This session is created and presented by our expert, Richa Mehta. She is a professional placement trainer, graduated in BTech from DDU and MBA from Nirma University. She has been working with students from colleges and universities across India to get them jobs, help craft their impactful resumes, and also help in cracking job interviews. She has experience in training 5,000 plus students, so we will welcome her to get started. While we are live, there is an option of sending your questions via comments. So feel free to ask questions. We have a person dedicated to give you answers live. And if you have any questions directly for the expert, we will take at the end as well. So if you want to comment, you can comment, and then you can also subscribe to our channel so that you get notifications for our next live session as well as any videos that we upload on job placements and careers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session of today, which is on understanding or learning how to crack your dream job interview. So before we start, Eid Mubarak to one and all. And all those who had attended our first webinar last Saturday, I really hope you had key takeaways from that webinar where we learned about resume building. And I hope that you have already started working on updating your resumes as well. If you need any expert assistance, you know where to reach out. So let's start with today's session on how to crack your dream job interviews. Now, before we start learning about that, let's understand something about this famous personality. I'm sure most of us recognize this face very, very nicely. Yes, it's Steve Jobs. So if anytime until today, if you would have read anything about Steve Jobs or his presentation skills, in fact, he's known for his presentation skills. So if you have come across any article mentioning or talking about those, you will understand from those articles that before giving any presentation, let's say for his product launch or any other event, before going on that stage for presentation, Steve Jobs rehearses his presentation 200 times. And that's a fact. Why do you think he must need to rehearse his presentation 200 times? Do you think he must not know about his product very well? Do you think he needs to remember all his product specifications? Or you think he is a person with average communication skills? No. That is not the reason that he used to rehearse so many times. The primary reason was he wanted to make sure that whatever message or whatever keywords he wanted to deliver to his audience in that presentation is very well effectively being covered when he speaks about it. He wanted to sell his product then and there, right? And when he wanted his message to reach effectively, of course, he had to practice, he had to introspect, he had to research, and then go on the stage. And that doesn't mean that he sounded rehearsed, right? So, this is what that famous personality also used to practice. Now, why am I talking about this in today's session? Is because the same concept, the same thing applies to your interview preparation as well. Just understand the situation of interviews when we are in the interview room with the recruiter. We just have those 10 to 12 minutes to impress the recruiter, to tell them everything about us which we want to tell them, to bring all those important keywords, skill sets in our answers. Now, this cannot happen effectively if we have not thought about this earlier. If we have not thought about the expected questions, if we have not sort of prepared their answers, rehearsed them, it just doesn't come out in the way we want in the interview. So it becomes very, very important that we prepare our answers much before our interviews, practice them, and then go in the interviews. What are the other advantages of this practice? It helps you build your confidence, right? And when I'm very, very confident about my content because I'm well prepared, I'm well rehearsed, that is when I can diverse my attention to other softer aspects like my communication skills, my body language, just because I'm not very much worried about my content, right? A lot of us here believe that interview skills are something like gifted skills. Not everyone can be great at interviews. It's not like that. Interview skills can be developed through a system. You can learn those, you can prepare for those, and you can win an interview. So, today, let's start our session with a very, very positive note that each of us here who is in this session, each one of us can crack our next job interview if we have practiced enough. So, let's start. What things to keep in mind if we want to really do that? Let's first understand why are interviews a part of a process for any job application? Or, in other words, what are the parameters that are tested while in the interviews? So, let's start with the very first one, which is profile fitment. Now, this is one of the very important factors that most of the recruiters are looking out for in the candidates. They want a candidate who is very much fit to their profile requirements as well as a good fit to their company culture. They have thousands of applications flowing in. So, if I could frame my answers in such a way that I could show myself as a good fit for the profile, I can win the interview. How do I do that? So my answers should include those keywords, those skill sets which you know that are important for this job profile. Next point would be personality aspects. Now, this is a softer aspect of an individual. So, interviewers definitely want to know that how aggressive are you as a person, or how calm or composed are you as a person. Nothing is right or wrong. Being aggressive is not wrong. Being calm and composed is not wrong. It just has to be suited to the role. So, for example, if I am applying for a sales role, I would need an aggressive personality. If I'm looking out for a person for a, like, let's say, financial analyst role, or for assistant role, then I would look for a calm, composed personality, right? So they would definitely like to test these personality aspects by asking you various questions about you. Next thing that they would definitely test in your interviews is your knowledge. Now, when I talk about knowledge, it is not just the technical knowledge. Of course, your technical and conceptual knowledge will definitely be tested. But apart from that, they are also looking out to know your general awareness. How much aware are you about things going on around? Which is why you have to be well read. They want to understand how much aware are you about the industry, so your industry knowledge, and how much have you researched about the company itself, so your company research. So if I have to sum it up, your technical knowledge, your general awareness, your industry knowledge, and your company research, all of these things are tested in an interview. Moving to the next point, which is body language. Yes. So definitely, so whenever you go for the interviews, you will see multiple panelists there, generally. Not every time, but most of the times. So one of the panelists is expected would be from an HR background, and he or she would be most of the times observing you. So what are they observing you for? It's just to understand your body language. A lot of times, a lot of gestures of our body language do give out messages if we are nervous of, or we are overexcited, or we are confident or overconfident. So all of these messages, consciously or unconsciously, comes out through the body language. The way you walk in, the way you take the seat, the way your body posture is when you are sitting for the interview, all of these things matter a lot. So yes, they definitely want to test these aspects as well. And the last thing which is tested in the interviews is your role clarity. Now, what do I mean by this is, the recruiter on the other side definitely wants to understand how much do you actually know about the role that you are applying for, right? And what you should do to be good or best at this answer. Till now, I have tried and tested a lot of ways with my students, and take my word on this. The best thing to do in this is try to talk to people who have been in the similar roles, in the similar industries. Try to talk to them, understand their daily work, their routine work, and that is how you will understand what are the key requirements for this role, right? So first is I'm so sorry. Yeah. So first is, of course, how clear you are about the role. Now, next thing what they want to test is about your future career goals. So what goals do you have in your short term as well as your long term? And how will they align with the kind of hierarchy that the company itself has? Right? So these are the things that they would test about a candidate through various questions that they are going to throw at you in the interview. Now, moving ahead with the next set of our discussion, which is the types of interviews. Now, you may wonder what are like so many question marks doing on the screen, but yes, there are different types of interviews, and different types of interviews needs to be handled in different types of ways. So let's understand various types of interviews over here. Starting with the very first one, which is HR interview. So, I'm sure a lot of you would have experienced this before, but if not, a lot of companies that you will apply for will have multiple rounds of interview. Just to give you an example, if you apply for Amazon, Amazon itself has 7 rounds of interview. Okay, so a lot of companies can have multiple rounds of interview where few rounds are technical rounds, and there will be 1 or 2 rounds which are HR rounds. So HR rounds are generally by the end of the process, and in this rounds, or in these kind of interviews, generally the recruiters will try to test your personality aspects. So what kind of questions are thrown in these aspects are to understand what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are your career goals 5 years, 10 years down the line, understanding about what was your biggest failure, what was your biggest achievement. So all of these are just to understand your softer aspects. So that's an HR round. Next that we will look to is the technical round. So as the name suggests, so technical rounds are generally to test the conceptual knowledge or the technical knowledge of a candidate. So asking questions about anything from their education background or any courses or certifications that they have done. All of those questions will be included in your technical round of interview. The next type of interview that we are going to look to is stress interviews. Just to be very honest with you, you may not find stress interviews a lot of times in the corporate interface. We see these kind of interviews more often when we go for admissions into MBA colleges. So just to give you an example, top IIMs, or if you have heard college named XLRI, they are known for stress interviews. So now what is the whole structure or motive of the stress interview? So generally in stress interviews, the situation is like that there would be definitely multiple panelists, and they will constantly try to throw questions at the candidate, even without giving you enough time to think, to answer back, or to reply effectively on those questions. You would be having a lot of questions to answer at a time. They may sometimes make fun of your answers in front of you in the interview itself. So all of such situations are created which stresses you out, which makes you feel that you're not doing good, or probably have already sort of spoiled the whole interview. You cannot do it, you cannot just crack it, etc. So whenever you get such kind of feelings in any interviews, you may feel that it is going towards a stress interview type. Please make sure that you maintain your composure. You are calm. You don't showcase your nervousness anywhere during your interview in your answers, right? You are still smiling nicely, not showing, even if you are angry at the recruiters, you're not showing your anger. You are smiling, you are composed, because that is what stress interviews are for. That is the only thing that they are testing in you, that how do you react under stress, under pressure, right? So this is the kind of interview that you wish you should not face, but if you do, it's not difficult to crack. Next that we'll be talking about is a behavioral kind of interview. Now this is one type which is very much asked in interview processes nowadays. So, what is a behavioral kind of an interview? So, generally, in such interviews, you will be facing situational questions. What do I mean by situational questions? So, interviewers will try to give you some hypothetical corporate situation. So, let's say, for example, you are leading a team of 10 people, and a team member under you did a mistake by leaking a confidential information. What will you do in such a case? So, what is the recruiter trying to do? He is trying to understand your team management or your leadership skills, right? Or probably, let's say, if I have to throw one more situation, so let's say the client that you are handling, he needs the delivery of the project in short time, and you don't have your teammates with you. How are you going to make sure that the project delivery is done on time? What steps will you take? So what are they trying to judge over here? Your solving skills, or how do you react under stress? So these are the kind of questions thrown at the candidate to understand that how will candidate react in a real life problem in a corporate scenario. They may also ask you questions from your prior work experience about any situation that you have already been into, and understanding how you tackled it. So, behavioral interviews are generally focused around such questions. Next, that we are going to look into are informal interviews. Now, what are informal interviews? So, a lot of times, companies have a very informal setup for the interviews, where they may conduct an interview at a, let's say, informal place like a coffee shop, right? They may want to just have a very casual discussion with the candidate. Now, why are these methods of interviews adapted? So, generally, with companies which are like startups, or they want to hire interns or anyone for a, let's say, sales profile and all, they just want to have that ice breaking atmosphere around them. They don't want a very uh, stressful or a pressurized environment. So when a recruiter believes in such free environment conversation, that is when they may opt for a very informal setup, which is where candidate can also be a bit relaxed while answering the questions. Next, that we are going to look to is your panel interview. So we have already mentioned this before. Any interview where you have multiple panelists sitting across, that is named or defined as panel interview. So generally, why do panel interviews take place? Because all the panelists sitting across, they will all have expertise in different areas. Someone may be an expert in the technical area you are applying for. Someone may be an HR recruiter from an HR domain on trying to understand your personality, etc. Right? So panelists from different expert areas sit together to interview a candidate. Next, that we are going to look into is group interviews. Now, this is the other way around. Panelist may be one, but there are group. There are multiple candidates who are interviewed together. There's a group of candidates interviewed together, which is why it is called group interview. Again, this is not seen very often in corporate scenario. There is one college, in fact, if you would have heard of SP Jain College in Mumbai. So when they take interviews for their MBA admissions, they conduct group interviews. Now, what is the benefit, or what are the recruiters trying to do in a group interview? So generally, when I make the candidates sit together, the structure of the group interview is such that one question, so for example, tell me something about yourself. So that one question is asked to every candidate one by one, right? So how does that help the recruiter? that helps the recruiter to immediately see the comparison between the candidates and select or reject the candidates in a faster way. So, group interviews are generally a faster way of selecting or rejecting the candidates compared to the individual interviews. Generally, in group interviews, some candidates may not perform very well under the pressure of being judged or noticed by other candidates, peer pressure, what we call it, but that should not be affecting the answers that you give. Next, that we'll be seeing are online interviews or Skype interviews, which are the most prevalent ones in today's times, as we all know. So nowadays, whatever processes are being carried out by the companies or the colleges across the world, I would say, they are going with this mode of Skype or online interviews, which is why it becomes very, very important for us to understand the dynamics of online interviews also, as we try to understand the dynamics of a one-on-one face-to-face interview, right? So in online interviews, there are few things that we should definitely be taking care of. So of course, first is how comfortable we are with our own technical setup. How confident are we about the complete, let's say, our internet connection, or our the system that we are using for the interviews, right? That is one part, technical setup. Next is how comfortable are we talking to the person on the screen? Are we able to maintain good eye contact? Are we able to deliver our expressions, our hand movements clearly? Because that is what the person is going to be able to see, right? They will not be able to see your complete body language, but your expressions and your hands will be visible. So now all of these preparations will definitely need practice. Practice speaking on the screen, dress up in the same way that you will be dressing up for your face to face interview, and be careful that your technical setup is well checked before the interviews. And the last type of interviews that we will see today are these walk in interviews. So, you may see a lot of walk in interviews advertisements in newspapers, right? So, those are open to all. They have given the requirements over there. You are not supposed to send any resumes beforehand. So, generally, you just need to walk in at that dedicated time and place, and you have to be in that big queue for interviews and just wish that yours goes well compared to others. So that's again just a general form, but there is no specific target audience over here. Just the specification is given and it is open to all. So these are the 9 types of interviews we have seen. As far as the answers, as far as our interview preparation is concerned, all the interviews have to be prepared in a very similar way. There is no such difference in that. The only thing we need to take care of is, in a particular setup or in a particular type of an interview, what things to keep in mind while delivering the answers, right? So for example, in stress interviews, what thing we have to keep in mind is just let the time go and let us be composed, not take up that pressure, right? Let's say if it's a group interview, let's understand not to take that peer pressure and let us give our best. Let's say if it's a Skype interview, how we have to prepare ourselves to be comfortable on screen. So these are different small aspects which are concerned to different types of interviews. But otherwise, as far as your preparation in terms of your answers are concerned, it's more or less the same. So let's move ahead with our next section of discussion, and the most important for today's session is preparation areas. So I have identified few key preparation areas from which the answers to any questions of an interview can be framed. So even before we start begin to, let's say, understand what questions are expected, or even before we start preparing or drafting our answers, it is very, very important that whatever areas that we are going to discuss right now, we have introspected ourselves very well and very much in detail in these areas, right? So let's start with the very first area, which is work experience or academics. So let's say for questions like take us through your work experience, or any conceptual testing questions comes from academics, right? So you have to very well have those important details from your work experience in mind before you start framing these answers. Now, what do I mean by important details? So number of projects you have been in, which projects with which important clients, if any important award or recognition or promotion that you would definitely not want to miss out to tell them in the interview, right? So all of those details which you definitely want to make sure that you have to speak about those, please make sure that you have introspected this well enough to have them in place. Next will be dips in resume. So a lot of times we may have some high lows in our resume. For example, you may have a year gap in your resume, or you may have some lows in your academic record in your resume. So in one of the, let's say in 12th or in your graduation, your academics were low compared to the other years. You may definitely expect the question explaining these, why year gap, or why are your marks low in a particular year, right? So please be prepared for honest, convincing answers in these questions, right? There is no way that you can change what has been done. And if we ourselves are not comfortable with these facts of our resume, and if we ourselves are not prepared for these questions, what will happen is, as soon as the recruiter will ask you, why is this gap here in your resume, you will become nervous because you didn't want that question to come because you were not prepared, right? We can't control what recruiter is going to ask you, but we can definitely be prepared if they ask, right? So again, emphasizing it, prepare for every each of those negative points of your resume as well. Next is internships or projects. Very, very important for freshers, right? If you have done your any internships or any key projects, a lot of questions will come where you can use that data, talking about, let's say, if they want to know in detail about your project, or if they ask you about your achievement, you can take an example from your internships. If they ask you about your failure, again you can take an example from there. A lot of questions can be answered using this data, so please make sure you have thought about it well. Next is current affairs. As we already saw earlier, one of the important aspects which are tested in the interview is knowledge. And knowledge also covers your general awareness, your industry awareness, and your company research. So that all sums up the section of current affairs. You should be well read and updated about any latest happenings of the company or the industry or the world as a whole, and be ready to discuss it if that topic comes out in the interview. Next that we'll be looking to is your extracurricular activities. Right. So, when I talk about your extracurricular activities, that may include your participations in the event, or let's say your participations in sports or cultural events of your college, or any social initiatives that you are a part of. So, definitely, when interviewer may ask you, like, what are your other interest areas? This is where your answer comes from, right? So you should have well thought about which things you want to mention and which things you can avoid in this section, and try to show yourself as a good dynamic personality by making use of this data over here. All right. Next that we'll be looking into is your achievements. So when I talk about your achievements, so in your achievements, what comes is your academic achievements, or your extracurricular achievements, or your achievements related to work experience. So all of these things can be included in your achievement section, right? So this is a very, very important section which you should definitely prepare, because I would love to highlight these points in as many answers as I can, as many answers possible, because these are the points I definitely want the interviewer to know about me, right? So this was your achievements. Next section that we'll be looking to is your hobbies. So a lot of times interviewers will really be interested to know, what do you do in your leisure time? What are your leisure time activities? How do you pass your time? And that is where your hobbies come into place. So if you are pursuing any hobby, make sure you know about that hobby in detail. Okay, so let's say, for example, I like dancing. Okay, then you cannot just say I like dancing and you don't know the forms of dancing, don't know the famous people in that domain, you don't know what are the famous, let's say, shows happening in the domain. So that doesn't work that way. You have to know in detail about whatever hobby that you are pursuing, right? And which is why it's very important to read about them. Next is your role growth. So this is where your future plans come into place. So the interviewers would definitely want to know, what are your career goals, your short-term goal, your long-term goal. What is the kind of promotion that you are looking forward to in the next few years, etc. Now, see, I'll be very, very honest with you in this answer. I know, we all know that most of us, including me, most of us are not very sure about what are we going to do 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. If we are not sure, how will we answer this question? Correct? Right? See, just understand one thing. The recruiter is asking this question to know that whether you are a good investment for them in the company, or will you leave their company in a very short time. Do you fit in their company's hierarchy, or you don't fit, right? So the smartest way to handle this would be to give them confidence that this is the company you have been looking for to join, this is the role that fits your career plan, right? And this is the role, and the future roles that you have thought of, all of those are available or possible to grow in that particular organization. Whether that is the truth or not, that we can right now keep aside, but our answers need to be framed in such a way that the recruiter has the confidence on you that for you it is a well thought choice that you are making by joining the organization, right? So that is where your role growth clarity comes into place. Next is company research. Very, very important. If in some answer, if I could talk to recruiter about their own company or their some company practices which I like, and if I am able to mention that to them, they would really love it. They would love the candidate who have already read a lot about the company, who knows the company well, and they would sort of feel that you are their own person, right? So that helps you build a good rapport with the recruiter. So company research becomes very important. On the other hand, if asked some question about the company and you cannot answer, that gives a very bad impression on the recruiter. Next section of preparation that we'll be seeing is your strengths. What are your strengths? What are the key points about your personality or about your technical expertise that you want to highlight, right? So, generally, such questions, as I said, strengths, weaknesses, they are asked in your HR interviews. You should definitely prepare yourself for at least three strengths related to the profile you are applying for. And don't just prepare the strength name. Also, so for example, if I say that one of my strength is time management skills, I can't just say time management skills is my strength. You should always give an example from your work experience or any other past experience which demonstrates your time management skills. So, in short, your strengths should always come with examples. Only then the recruiter can trust on what you are saying. The next thing and the last thing in our preparation areas that we'll be looking to are your weaknesses. We may not be very comfortable talking about our weaknesses, and especially if we are not prepared. And if I ask you, what are your weaknesses? I'm sure you can't think of these things on the spot, right? So please make sure that you have thought of at least two weaknesses beforehand, and such weaknesses which will not damage your profile too much, right? They should be milder weaknesses with the steps that you are taking to overcome them, right? So for example, if I would put in front of you, I have a weakness that I sometimes try to going, like, because I try to go in lot of detail with my project, I sometimes tend to miss out on deadlines. But I'm now starting to prioritize my task, schedule my project tasks in a way, working from behind, which helps me complete each of my project portions in the stipulated time, and I could deliver them on the deadlines. So somehow this weakness will not work very negatively for your profile, but you have still given it as a weakness. And always make sure you are also giving out your plans to work on it. Don't just mention the weakness and sound very casual about it. All right. So these were 11 preparation areas that we have seen. If I have prepared my data, my own profile data from all of these areas very well, if I have all those bullet points ready with me on a piece of paper and in my mind, I can frame answers using those points very effectively. And believe me, you will not miss out on those important details which you should give in the interview room. Coming out of the interview room and saying, I had to say this, but I forgot, is not going to help you out in any way, right? So, introspecting ourselves in these areas becomes very, very necessary, and it's a time consuming process. So you need to give that well deserved time of at least 4 to 5 days to this process. Now, let's go to our next area of discussion today. So you are going to see a lot of question marks in our presentation today, because somehow these points, I'm expecting that along with the presentation, even you have few points ready, and you may just see if those match with our points over here or not. So, checklist before the interview. What things we need to make sure it's ready before we step in for the interviews? First thing, and very important, first and foremost, is your resume. Your very well updated, formatted resume. And always make sure that whichever interview you go in for, face to face, offline interviews, carry at least 3 copies, printed copies of resumes, because there may be multiple panelists sitting across. They may have your resume beforehand, they may not. So if they ask you, you should have those many copies of printed resumes ready to offer them. So first is your resumes. Second thing is your folder of documents. So all your important documents, consisting of your certifications, your degree mark sheets, your extracurricular activity certifications, all of those documents should be ready in a folder, and you should be carrying that folder along with you in the interview. Now, here, one very important thing I would like to add: in these documents, you may also carry some of your artworks if you have some art as your hobby. Now, what do I mean by this is, if let's say you are into painting, you are into painting of some type, you may carry your few latest paintings along with you. The recruiter, if is interested in that field, may want to see your paintings, and that would be a good thing to remember you for the recruiter. Also, let's say if you are fond of writing poems, you may carry few of your poems with you. That's one good way to sort of give that differentiating factor for the recruiter to remember you, right? So please carry all of those documents with you. Next is your attire. I know it's a very, very obvious thing and maybe a very trivial thing, but it is very important that we have our complete attire from head to toe ready at least a day before, well ironed, well kept, right? So that on the last day, that is not one of the headaches that you have at the back end of the mind, right? So make sure these things are ready much beforehand. Next, we'll be seeing is FAQs, or frequently asked questions. We all know that there are a lot of questions. For example, tell me something about yourself, or let's say, why do you want to apply for this company? Why do you want to apply for this role? Right? Tell us something not mentioned in the resume, etc. We'll be discussing these questions in our further live sessions. But we already know that there are these sets of questions which we very well expect to be asked in the interviews. So now it becomes very, very important that we are at least prepared for these expected questions. If we don't prepare for these questions, then it would sort of not sound very impressive to the recruiter, because even they know that these are very generic questions that candidate already knows about, right? So make sure that you're well prepared for at least the FAQs, or the expected questions of an interview, right? And the last thing that we need to make sure before the interview is a very proper, comfortable meal. Maybe breakfast, lunch, dinner, depending on the time of your interview. right? Make sure that you have had a very comfortable meal. There are scientific reasons for this. Let's say if I have not, if my stomach is not full, if I am hungry, your brain will not work to its best efficiency when you have to answer to the questions in the interview, right? So you have to be, your stomach has to be filled good with good amount of food and nutrition before you go for the interview. Also, the other way around, if your stomach is too much full in an uncomfortable way, again, that is going to sort of make you drowsy and not comfortable in the interview. So make sure you have a proper healthy meal before you go for the interview. Right? So these are the things I need to make sure that I have checked before my interview. Now, moving ahead with the next things, that was before the interview. Now, what things to take care of during the interview or in the interview? So, let's check these few interview etiquettes. First is, yes, very, very important, smile. Smile throughout the interview. Don't laugh, smile, a pleasant smile. How much ever you think your interview is not going good, or how much ever you are not liking the panelist, still, you should have a nice, pleasant expression throughout your interview, right? Next is greeting. It is very important that we have a very pleasant greeting the first time we meet the recruiters. It can be a nice wish, a good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all the recruiters, maintaining a good eye contact with all of them. Now, we would have had confusions about this. When it comes to shaking of hands, please do not initiate that process of shaking hands. If the recruiter initiates it, you may definitely do a confident handshake with the recruiter. But otherwise, you may just greet them and just exchange those pleasantries and avoid shaking hands if they have not initiated it. Next is body language. Please be very conscious about your body language practices. A lot of us may have such habits of, continuously shaking your legs, or fidgeting with a pen, or somehow sort of making very distractive hand movements, right? So you have to be very, very conscious about these body language aspects. Also, your posture, you have to be very sure that your posture is nice, erect, confident whenever you sit for the interview. Next is your mobile phone. Please make sure that either you don't carry your mobile phone, or you carry it in a switched off mode in the interview. If your mobile phone rings in between the interview, that's going to be a very embarrassing moment for you, right? So please make sure that doesn't happen with us. And the last thing, and the very, very important point is, never ever bluff or lie about anything in the interview. Whatever the question is, if you don't know the answer, it is okay. It is really okay to say, sorry, sir, I am not very well aware about this, but I'll make sure I read about it. It's okay to say this, but do not lie, because let's believe that the interviewer is well read about whatever they are asking you about, right? So never bluff in the interview. All right, so these are a few very basic interview etiquettes which we sometimes miss taking care of. So make sure you take a note of this. Now let's look at what are those reasons by which we can get rejected. And I'm sure you'll be surprised to see some of these reasons. But yes, candidates do fall for these. First, too trendy. 70%, that's a huge number. 70% of the times, a recruiter thinks that the candidate across is trying to be too trendy, trendy in a, how does this trendy come? So, for example, if your resume is like not very professional, it's very colorful, you have used infographics and all, that's a trendy way. If you have dressed overly, that's a trendy way. If, let's say, your document folders is very eye catching, or for girls if the makeup is very eye catching, that's too trendy, right? So these are the reasons sometimes that the recruiters may not very well appreciate. Next is no eye contact. Now, while you are giving your answers, if you are not maintaining a healthy eye contact with all the recruiters, they may feel offended, or they will judge that you are not a very confident person, right? If I look up and speak, or if I look down and speak, I cannot very well connect with the person across. So if I want to make a good connection, eye contact becomes very, very important, right? Next is way of walking through the door. So this is again, sometimes it goes very much unnoticed by us that we have to even prepare for this. But yes, the way you walk through the door, the way you open the door, have did you just do it with a lot of force? The way you walk in, are you doing a very artificial style of walk, or are you normal? Are you nervous? Are you confident? All of these things are judged. So, how you walk through the door becomes important. No information about a company. That's a crime. If I don't know about the company questions asked, recruiter is not going to like you for sure, right? So, company research becomes very important. Next is low confidence and no smile. So, as we said, smiling is one of a very important interview etiquette, right? So, smiling face and a confident personality is what's going to be appreciated. Understand one thing, if you are 80 and 100 on a technical side, it is okay for a recruiter, because recruiter can train you for technical aspects. But if you are 80 on 100 on a personality side, recruiter will think twice, because personality of an individual cannot change, right? So your softer aspects or your personality aspects becomes very important than your technical aspects. Next is your bad posture. So the way, again, you are carrying yourself, the how much you are comfortable in your own skin, the way you are sitting, the way you are standing, that shows your posture. And bad posture again sets a bad impression. Bad handshake. So if you are in a situation where you have to make a handshake, your loose handshake or a very tight handshake again does not give a very impressive first impression. So make sure that you have practiced confident handshakes with your friends or your family members, and just check how they feel about their handshake. That's the best way to get it checked, right? Next is crossing arms. So if I cross my arms and sit in the interview, now that shows that you are a very closed personality, you are not open to suggestions, and also it doesn't allow you to think openly, right? So crossing arms and sitting, a bad body language sign. So make sure that you avoid that. And the last thing that we're going to see for today is few of the bad answers that we tend to give for few of these questions. Tell me about your weakness. So these are the few bad answers I have personally come across. I can't think of any right now. I tend to lose patience with incompetent people. That shows you are a boastful person. Or I work too hard. I'm a perfectionist. So you can't be showing this as your weakness, right? Next is, why did you leave your previous job? I hated the job, the company. I was bored. They were not promoting me. Please make sure that anytime during the interview, you should never badmouth your previous job or your previous employer, right? So, such answers set a very negative image. Why should we hire you? So, I don't know, or it sounds like a good job. I'm great with people and a hard worker. I'm a team player. So, as we said, if I want to show these things, I have to tell it with examples. Just saying I'm a team player doesn't make you a team player, right? So, these are the answers which are very cliche and not expected in the interviews. Next is, why did you apply for this role? I was looking through the ad and it seemed interesting. It sounds like a good job because I need this job. No. Your answer should be targeted to what exactly are you expecting out of this role, which should cover your knowledge about the role itself. Right? So these are again very generic answer, and I think these answers can fit to any role. Right? So your answers should not be generic. It should be specific to the role that you are applying for. Next is, tell me something about yourself. I am a dance enthusiast. I have learned the forms and follow it with passion, or family details. So such answers are not a place where you just highlight about your family or your hobbies. You have to highlight more important parts of your profile. So we will, of course, learn about framing these answers in detail in the coming sessions. But these are the answers I should definitely avoid giving. Do you have any questions? So, do I have to work overtime? Or I don't have any questions? Or what perks do we get? Will I have to relocate, travel? Tell me about the company. Now, these are the questions I would definitely not ask the recruiter. Some of them I'm expected to know myself, like about the company. And other things are not a very good sign to be asked in the interview itself, right? So these are the few questions and answers to those which should definitely be avoided in an interview. So these were the discussions where we covered today your important aspects while preparing for your interview. In case you are looking out for a personalized and a more detailed interview preparation with mock interviews to understand how good are you with these parameters, you can definitely reach out to us on these social media handles. And we'll be waiting for you guys next weekend again with the third session of our series. Thank you so much for this time. And I really hope you have learned important things today and wish you good luck for your next interview process. Thank you so much.